Okay, you're back. Did you quit out of it, or did it kick you off?
Like when you left?
Yeah. So it said that I left, did I? Did it?
Yeah. So I still stayed on there, but
Okay, yeah. It must have booted me off one and put me on another. Okay. So I'm assuming you can see Rhino right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also going to cover the stuff that we did in the most recent tutorial. You don't need me to cover anything from the previous one, right?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, so the key things that we're dealing with are finger jointing. So let's try that. So in terms of laser cutter, there is a possibility to do a finger jointing system, but just not like a dovetail. Instead, it's more like so. So you do it does require a little bit of glue, but you can clearly see here that as the pieces are cut out, they slot together, right?
Yeah.
So you could draw that manually, and it would be annoying, or we can draw it using a script. And within that script, there are these concepts that appear in coding. They have to do with patterns. So I'll just get Grasshopper up.
Should I be like following along with you, as in like doing the script as you do the script, or?
That's how we run the tutorial.
Yeah.
If that's going to help you, then go ahead. I'm guessing you've only got one monitor though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess just keep me on like an Alt tab.
Yeah.
So like tab between the two.
Yeah.
And then just let me know if you need me to stop.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. So Grasshopper and Rhino. Do you need me to? Do you need me to wait until you've got them running?
I've already got it open.
Okay.
But I don't know if Matilda has it open.
Matilda's here too.
Hello.
Okay, that's fun. We need a. We're going to start as if from scratch. So there's going to be rectangles in our previous script that are being generated from the edges. Do you remember that point?
Yeah.
So we can start generating those. I'm going to make a makeshift one here instead of actually using the ones from that previous script, because no matter what, as long as we're making rectangles, this script should work. And I'll just go to top view. Cool. Okay. So the key factor in writing any script that is rigorous and should work multiple times in different circumstances is you need to work on it as if there's more than one element, because the way Grasshopper works, if you don't... Oh, we've got another person? No. Okay. Is everyone still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So instead of just working on a single element, it's best to work on two or more. That way you can just keep an eye on the fact that your script is actually working on more, that it's working with an infinite number of components instead of one. So in this case, I'm going to place down a rectangle. I'm going to put some sliders in to control like a relatively decent number. So it was about 200 mils and 100 roughly for Y. So I think it was 60 and 100. But we need to produce two rectangles, right? So to do so, we can use a point and use a series to generate multiple values of that point. So in this case, we plug that into Y and then use our Y value on our rectangle to generate the step between that. That will then control where those points are, and we can then use them to generate more rectangles. So if I set that now to 2, so we're only dealing with 2 rectangles, and we drag in another slider for the width, then we've now got 2 unique rectangles sitting in sequence that we can now work with. Do you need me to explain that at all? Do I need to drop? I think I'm. Do you want me to put bifocals on? Will that help?
Yes, please.
I need to install it. So this machine is not normally used for Rhino. So hang on. Code. Okay. Come on. I think this would be faster. It's quite a beefy machine.
Just
Hey, okay. Let's get this up. Put bifocals in. Perfect. Okay, so we should have 2 rectangles. Are you guys at that point?
Not yet. Hold on.
So do you understand what I'm doing here in terms
Yeah.
of we've got a list of numbers. They're being controlled by this slider. That slider is also controlling the height of our rectangle. The series is then determining a point in space, so we're controlling its y coordinate, and therefore when we plug that in, the rectangle is generating at those separate points. And because we've got 2 points, if we have a list of 2 sliders, so we can view these as this. If we have 2 sliders, then the corresponding index of those sliders to those points are going to control the length of the rectangle. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I'll just draw. We're going to do finger joints, right? And we're going to do them at the left and right hand side of these, so that they key together after we laser cut them. If I were to draw, this is going to be difficult because usually I do this by hand. Okay, so if I were to draw a box, and this is the plan view of the box, and we're going to have laser cut elements on the side, then, and they are 3 mils, then if we cut a piece out this long, so in this case 86 millimeters, and we cut another piece out at 86 mils, then you're going to end up with a clash in this corner, right? Like that's this element here through that corner is going to clash with this element here through that corner. And so if we weren't finger jointing, we would have to do something like this, where you extend, you trim 3 millimeters off one end, but leave the other, and you end up with that overlapping system. But when you're finger jointing,
sorry.
Is that fine?
You
it's
know,
quite loud.
Yeah, it's my. I don't know how to turn it off on my. Oh, hold on. I'm putting headphones in.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So what we have then is, when we finger joint, what we're actually doing is we need to cut our pieces so that they do clash and overlap, but they do so in a way where the overlap is alternating, so if this was our other one in 3D, they never clash wherever they never clash. I'm gonna have to do this. Do you get that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Okay, good. Don't want to spend too much time explaining that. So in this case, when we take our left and right sides, we just need to think, how are we going to actually make them work? Because if we made a system like so, that's not going to work. Because what we've actually done is we've extended this 3 millimeters longer than what it needs to be, and trim this in 3 millimeters. So instead, what we need is a system like so. Now, a lot of people used. If we were to describe this as a system, like a logical process that we go through, the first thing that we need to do is identify the edges of our rectangle. Okay. So this is really awkward for me, by the way, because I'm so used to seeing people's faces being like, yes, they understand. So just whenever, can you just let me know if things don't make sense?
Yeah.
As long as I know that, then I'll be confident. So we've got rectangles here, these two rectangles, and they're understood as a single object. But we want to extract out of those rectangles the left and right.
Right. Yeah.
So the way that we do that is we can explode that polyline, which then that gives us 4 line-like curves that describe the edge of each rectangle. And in a very basic, crude manner, we can extract those edges by selecting the index that we want. Okay, so there are far more sophisticated ways of doing this, but for beginners, we're just going to pick them by their index. So from memory, the other day, index 1 and 3, I believe, are the left and right. So if I go, right and left, sorry. So if I go from 0 to 3 in a number slider, and I just grab that from the list item, I hide everything and just show what I'm grabbing. So index 0 is the bottom, index 1 is the right, index 2 is the top, and index 3 is the left. So if we want to grab the right and the left, we just need to have 2 sliders going into that. Now, just note, can you guys see the little icon appearing on my cursor?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I hold Shift, can you see that it's changed a little bit?
Yeah.
So it turns green and it's got a little plus in the top right-hand corner. So that's just showing you that I'm pressing Shift, and that then lets me drag and combine 2 sliders into 1 input.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they kind of forget that they're holding Shift, and so you'll find that, like, I'll show you guys later to replace like a component in, and when I do that, I'm not holding Shift, and that'll break. Just so you just need to be a little bit vigilant with that, or let me know if things are breaking later. So in this case, we want geometry. We want 1 and 3. Cool.
Sorry, could you just explain how the index thing works again? So
Sure.
Is it just every line is like a number 1 to 3 or something, 0 to 3?
So in every list, so for example, if I grab another series, every list in Grasshopper each item has an index. The first item will always be 0, and then each item after that, its index will go up by 1.
Yeah.
So in this case, if we start our number at 100, then index 0 will be 100.
Yeah.
And index 7 will be 107. So in the case of these rectangles, once we explode them, it's going to place each edge of that rectangle into a list.
Okay.
And it just happens to be that the bottom edge, so this edge and that edge, is index 0. And then because Rhino and Grasshopper they're not chaotic. They have an order to them, these programs. So they're going to be in order. So the first edge, the bottom, will then move on to the second edge, the third edge, and the fourth edge.
Yeah.
So we know that the index is 1 and 3 for right and left. So the curve goes counterclockwise, and a really good demonstration of that is if I just evaluate length right now with this explode, you can see a point moving along each edge. So we're going to start the point at the beginning, and it moves along. And so you can kind of see in the bottom rectangle, as I move it from 0 to 1, it's going counterclockwise.
Yeah.
And the same is happening on the top rectangle. It's just where these two rectangles are touching. Like if I just break these apart a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So we can see that they're both going counterclockwise, right?
Yeah.
So that means, and this will become very important to us soon, that the right side of this is its start point is at the bottom and its end point is at the top. And for the left-hand side, the start point is at the top and the end point is at the bottom.
Yeah.
And that becomes very important when we start trying to define the way this finger jointing system is working. So before we start worrying about offsetting and moving or whatever, we need to think about how we're going to take this line and actually make it look like this finger joint. So there's like, can you think of what's like one of the steps that we need to take in terms of getting this line to look like this, like just logically or just through language? What step would you take manually to start making this work?
Wait, what do you mean by that? Like,
so
Would you like cut it?
So see this line. Imagine I haven't drawn. I've got a line like this, right, in Rhino, and yeah, we want to cut it, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to cut it into these segments, and then we're going to move it.
All right.
So what instruction would you give to yourself or to me to cut it? Like, where do I cut it?
So would you just divide it into equal segments, like the different lengths?
Yes, that is one thing that you could do. So and that's the exact thing that we're going to do in Grasshopper. So in Grasshopper, there's a whole bunch of division elements for curves.
Yeah.
And the one that we're going to use today is shatter. And the reason we're going to use shatter is what it does is it takes a curve and it breaks it into separate segments based on a parameter. So, for example, if we break this curve up at the parameter 0.250, what it's actually doing is, this curve. What it's actually doing is making that a curve and then that a separate curve.
Okay.
Cool?
Yeah.
So what divide does normally is it takes curves and it places points on them at the different segments. And what shatter does is instead it actually outputs the actual curves that have been broken up. So we don't want to control this with a slider because we want it to be more than just two lines. So we can use the range component. So you can find that here. So this will be something new. Now range works very much like series. What it's generally used for is to generate a certain, like a series of numbers. So I'm just going to start this at 0 again. But instead of, like, the way series works is it takes a start value, a step value, and a count. What range does is it takes a range. So in this case, 0 to 1. Can you read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then a number of steps. So in this case, it's going to take 0 and 1, and it's going to divide it into 10 steps. So we always know what the minimum number will be, and we always know what the maximum number will be. And the value that goes into n, the division, is going to determine, like, an even, and that needs to be an integer, is going to determine the number of steps, and they're going to be even.
Yeah.
So when we plug that into the shatter, and we're going to find, if I just quickly give you the endpoints, you can read that on here, that we're shattering these curves evenly along that line.
Yeah.
Now, a key thing in getting that to work with shatter, because if you just use shatter by itself without changing anything in it, it's going to give you a result like this, where the value is going to be understood as a dimension and not a parameter, like between 0 and 1. And in this case, because we're using the default value of 0 to 1, we can just sort of force shatter to understand the curve as a percentage. So if you right-click that and select reparameterize, then instead of 1 meaning 1 millimeter, instead 1 will mean 100%.
Yeah.
Wait,
Does that
so
make sense?
so with the previous thing that you did, you didn't reparameterize it, right? And it still came up with the same result, how everything was like equally spaced apart?
You mean like divide curve? This one?
Oh, yeah, that one. So you can do both if you want
Yeah,
to.
divide curve. Divide curve, it works on the consideration that you can only divide it by a certain number. So it has to be 100%, right? But with shatter, I could say I want to shatter this curve at 3 mils. And so instead of putting in a reparameterize, I can put in the number 3. So I'll just do that now. Let's demonstrate. And that actually separates it at 3 millimeters along that line. So the reparameterize just allows us to work with percentages or dimensions. And in this case, we care about dimensions. So percentages. So 3 won't work. 3 is like 300%, and that's not on that curve. So instead, we need a number between 0 and 1.
Okay.
Cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've now got, by the way, every time I right-click a component and select simplify, I'm purely doing that just to make this data structure here less confusing, and it just breaks it down into smaller components. So that's the only reason I'm doing that. So I'm just going to right-click simplify just so that doesn't get so complex. But what we're seeing now is we've got a list. Let's make this less heavy. We're going to have a list of segments. So in this case, if I'm dividing by 2, I'm getting 2 segments.
Yeah.
Now, see how these are broken up? Like there's a dark line breaking that list up. Like just intuitively, what do you reckon that line is doing?
It's just separating them, right?
Yeah. So just in terms of the way that things are ordered, so this is the first rectangle, and that was our first line, the right one, and the left line is our second line. And then this is our second rectangle, and the right line is our first line, and the left line is our second, do you see how there's 4 separate? Let's call each of these a branch. See how there's like 4 separate branches for each curve?
Yeah.
Yep.
And they each have like almost like a little address on them. So in this case, the address is 0001 1011. And that works just like this index. So 0 is most likely going to be related to our rectangle. And 0 in that is the first item in that rectangle. 01 is first rectangle, second item, which is our left.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so for example, if I was to add a third rectangle, what will likely happen is I'll get another 2 elements, another 2 branches, and they'll have 2, 0, 2, 1, and they'll have 2 elements in each. So let's do that now. Let's add a third. So we get our third rectangle. And look, we get 2, 0, 2, 1.
Yeah.
So right now, all we have to consider when it comes to branches is that they're just keeping things separate and organized. And so that means that when I run some run these through components, it's only going to consider each line within its own system. So we don't have to worry about the left and right line affecting each other.
Okay.
Cool?
Yeah.
In the future, when things get a bit more complex, then you can use branches in a very powerful manner. But in this case, we're just using them to keep things separate. And fortunately, the way Grasshopper works, it automatically starts putting these in branches, so that there is we haven't actually done anything in here to control branching, apart from that simplify. So Grasshopper's automatically putting some logic into the way that it separates your elements.
Yeah.
Cool?
Should we be using simplify in our scripts as well, or are you just doing it to make it like easier for us to look at?
Okay, so if I didn't simplify that, what it's done is see how there's like, if I just look at these two left values in that branch structure,
Yeah.
see how they're all the same?
Yeah.
So that's actually, we don't need that information.
Okay.
And so there's going to be times when things are going to look like this, and this obviously you wouldn't do this, but sometimes Grasshopper components will do this to you. You'll end up with branch structures looking like this.
Yeah.
When in fact they only have to really look like that.
All right.
And so it just helps you read it instead of like having all the computer, like the computer's putting a whole bunch of logic in, but it doesn't actually have to, because it can be simplified, and so we simplify it.
Okay.
But I'll only ever tell you to simplify when you actually do need to simplify. So this is purely just for demonstration of how branches work.
All right.
Otherwise, like, this gets a bit confusing. If that makes, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So don't worry about the simplify, and we also don't have to worry about the endpoints. What we do need to consider though, if I just make this more now, so if we go to 4, now if we go back to that sort of like logic process, so let's imagine you've asked me to divide this up manually, like so. Based on what you just saw, there are 4 lines in there, right? There's 1.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'll just turn off Gumball. There's 2. There's 3. There's 4.
Yeah.
What's the next step? How would you then instruct me to keep going on in making this finger joint.
So you now have to do the line horizontally.
Well,
To-
let's work with the lines that are going vertical first.
Okay. So would you
Okay.
just shift every second one over?
Yeah.
bit.
Is there another term that you would use for shift?
Move.
Okay. So, and which direction am I moving them?
To the left.
Okay. Now, so imagine this. Let's do this. Let's actually move this all into a system like so. Now, just remember the process that you're instructing me to do is also going to be the same process that I do over here. So if that was my line, I've moved our lines to the left, right?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
No.
Okay, so is there a way that we could actually, if you instruct me, how do I actually move these lines again? So I'll do that again. Can you give me an instruction other than moving them left?
I don't know.
So instead of moving left, could I be moving them in or out?
Yeah, okay.
So which direction do I move them?
In.
Brilliant. Okay. So I've moved them in, right? And for this system over here, which I've deleted, I'm moving them in. Perfect, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just start that whole process again. How can you repeat that same? Just repeat that to me again.
So you move it in
So which ones do I move in?
every second line.
Okay, so that's a critical thing as well, right? Because if you don't identify which lines to move in, then they all move in. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's every second line, right?
Yeah.
That moves in. Okay, perfect. So what we need to do now in Grasshopper is script that particular command. So grab every second line and move them in by a dimension.
Yeah.
So that makes a whole lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
Just actually like coming up with that pseudocode, that like instruction set is quite important. That logical process of getting things to work in order, and what commands do we have to give the computer to get that to work.
Yeah.
So before we move anything, it's probably best that we actually identify which lines we want to move.
Yeah.
So in this case, we probably want to use a pattern instead of saying every second line. So in Grasshopper, patterns, the way that you actually take an element and or a list and you disperse it using a pattern is done through dispatch. So you can find dispatch under set in lists. And then if we insert our shatter into that, we won't actually see that much of a change. So I'm just going to hide everything. If you preview what a dispatch does, it's going to actually show you everything that gets dispatched to A and everything that gets dispatched to B at the same time. So I'm just going to quickly, instead of previewing dispatch, I'm going to use a curve parameter, sorry, and I'll just delete our little example. And what that does is it dispatches elements to A. So you can see those ones in green. Is that hard to see?
No, I can see it.
No, it's fine.
I might display it.
So could you just explain what dispatch does again?
Yeah, I will. Let me just. If I have this set up, that'll. By the way, you don't need this. This is just me demonstrating.
Yeah.
So those selected in green coming out of A, and those selected in pink are coming out of B.
Yeah.
Okay? So what dispatch does is it takes, I'll get rid of that. It takes a list, so that's this list here, and it takes a pattern. And so the default, we're going to use the default pattern. For me to be able to see that default pattern, I can either select over it, and you can see there it says true, false.
Yeah.
If I extract parameter from that, so that's right click, extract parameter, then I can actually see, like I can grab that as a component and then see that plugged into a panel. So what dispatch does is it takes a Boolean value of true, false, and it dispatches this list as a pattern into A and B, relating A relates to true and B relates to false. So A equals true. Sorry, it's true equals A, false equals B. Cool.
Yeah.
And that loops, so it wraps. So instead of it just going true, false, and then false, false, false. So 0 is true, false, false, false. Instead it goes true, false, true, false.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Yep.
So that now we've got a list of curves. There should be 2 in each. One relating to the trues, which will be even, and one relating to the falses, which will be odd. Cool.
Yep.
So that pattern can be anything you want. You can go in and set that to be true, 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 false. And then so the first 3 elements will go into true, and then the 4th element will go into false. And then the next 3 elements will go into true, and then the next element after those will go into false. So you can use this to define any pattern you want.
So what happens when you need a pattern that does more than 2 things?
We can cover that later.
Okay.
But the component that does that will be sift pattern. I don't really like what sift pattern does in terms of its output. You just note you probably need to run sift pattern with a clean tree, and just make sure the sifted elements are going into the T value of your clean tree. So that then you can zoom into that and actually hit and add more elements coming out of that.
Okay.
Cool?
Yep.
For this exercise, we don't need that. So we've now made the system that selects each line that we want, and we're going to work. Let's work as if B is the one that we're going to shift or move, right?
Yeah.
So that we could go through a really complex process to work out exactly which way is in and which way is out using Grasshopper. But there's actually an easy system that we can use based on the way that we've drawn our rectangles. So remember before how I was talking about how the right line goes from the bottom to the top and the left line goes from the top to the bottom?
Yeah.
So what that actually does is it means that we can use that direction to help us use the same value to move these lines in to the left of their direction. So for example, this is, if you consider the fact that this line is going like this, that's the left. And if this line is going like this, then this is the left.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So, and that is something that you've probably used a lot in CAD packages, which would be offset. So if we use offset loose, just for today, and we use that on our curves, and we just need to make sure that it is being understood on the XY plane. So you can get that under vector under plane. If we plug that into P, that'll just guarantee that it works. Sometimes it might not. So this is just making sure that it does. And then we have a slider that we can input our thickness. So in this case, we're making these out of 3 mil ply. So we can control that. Now, do you notice how this is is this going the right way or not?
No.
So it's not going the right way?
No.
Okay, so that means a positive number is going right. What do you think would require us to make this go left?
Negative.
Cool. Okay, and so what we're going to do just quickly is we'll grab the negative value under math in operators.
Yeah.
We'll plug that into negative, and so that'll just make sure that any positive number that we put into this will always be going left.
Okay, yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Wait, sorry, what does the XY plane do again? Like
okay, so if you have a line in 3D and you ask Grasshopper to offset it, Grasshopper it'll make a quick assumption on that line on the plane that it wants to offset on. So for example, if I drew a line like this.
So is it just making sure that you're in only 2 dimensions?
Yeah. So if I draw a 3D line like so and I offset it, what plane do you offset it on?
Okay, yeah.
Because there's an infinite number of planes that could be derived from that line. So what this is doing is just it's just forcing Grasshopper not to make an assumption, and it's just saying, we want you to understand this in XY. Don't consider it in any other plane.
Yeah.
Cool?
Yep.
Okay, so we should have, if I just quickly hide our dispatched B element, once we've offset it, we should be seeing this is very close to being a finished finger joint, right?
Yep.
As I start increasing the number, the pattern is going to kick in. It doesn't matter how many we put in, it's going to dispatch the odds to B, to B and the evens to A. And this offset number will always make sure that it's going in. And it will always be 3 mils.
Yeah.
We just note we do need this to always be an even number. This steps slider. Just realized that I didn't explain that in class. Because if I made that odd, see how we've got an element that's out, let's say out, and an element that's in, and then on the left we've got an element that's out and then in, and we actually want it to be in out. So if we make that even, then we've got out in and in out.
Yeah.
We can actually force that to be even. We double click it and select even in the rounding, then that way when we're dragging it up and down, it won't be anything other than an even value.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So there's this component. It's one of the more recent components that Grasshopper's had, and when I say that, that means it's been around for like a year or two now. Called Connect Curves. What Connect Curves does is, I'll just quickly demonstrate it. It takes a list of curves and it connects them. Cool?
Yeah.
So what really matters is the fact that the start point, it considers the start point and the end point, the start point and the end point, and also the order in which the curves are in the list. So for example, if I were to select these curves in a different order, then it's not actually going to affect this outcome. Hang on, let me just do 3. So if I select these curves in a different order, we get that, or a different order. I think 3 is probably a bad example as well. Oh, there we go. So see how it's different?
Yeah.
So the direction also matters. So if I flip this curve, then the outcome will be different. So connect curves is the thing that we're going to use to pull these together. So, but the thing is, we've got 2 separate lists. We've got a list of all the ones that are outside. So if I actually start connecting them, it just ignores this separate list.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If I have these working on this list, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is we need to somehow bring these lists back together again. But if we were to bring them back together, we can't have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, then combine with this consecutively, where you got, so after 4, you've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Instead, we need the item on this list to be placed back together again on that original order that we had in the shatter. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, for example, this dispatch that we've done, it's kind of like you've taken a list and you've dispersed it, right?
Yeah.
There's a way of doing the opposite of that, very much like braiding or doing a plait in your hair. So you've got consider a list of 3 items, your hair strands, or rope strands, and you take the first item and you slip that in between the second and third, and then you take the third item and you slip that now in between the first and second.
Yeah.
So in this case, the component that does that here is called weave. As you would it's an intuitive name, right?
Yeah.
So what weave does is it takes a pattern in P and inputs in 0 and 1, and it weaves them together based on that pattern. Now, in this case, dispatch is thinking of true and false as A and B.
Yeah.
It can also be considered as 1 and 0. And what you'll find in other computer science and maths is that 1 and 0 is actually the status quo. So A and B is kind of this thing that Grasshopper's slipping up on in terms of the way that it's naming it, and really that should be 1 and 0. So if I want to weave these back together, I can actually use the same pattern that we used to dispatch them, because it's not like we want to change the order of them. So we can use that same pattern. What lists do you think need to go into 0 and 1? Which list goes into 0?
I have no idea.
Just think about it. I'm sending all my falses out to B, and false is so B or false is equal to 0, and all our trues are coming out to A, and true or A is equal to 1. So which list do you think should go into 0, and which list do you think should go into 1?
Would it be the opposite?
No.
Oh, okay.
So it's because we want them to go back in the same order, right?
Yeah.
So if we want everything to be the same, A will go into its corresponding A or 1. and B will go into its corresponding B or 0. So now, if I'll just quickly demonstrate what's happened. So you can now see those little numbers? They're going at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I plug these in the wrong socket, it goes, the second one is 0, and then the first one is 1, and then the third one is, the fourth one is 2, and then it's not working right. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, if you do end up making those mistakes, nothing's permanent, and just look at what you've done and think you can use components like this. So evaluate length and point list. Point list you can find under display in vector, and what that'll do is it actually just give you a number for each item, each point in that list on the screen, so you can actually visually see the order that it's in. Cool.
Yep.
So now, if we use connect curves on that woven element, we get like a funky looking puzzle piece type thing, and that to me looks like it is working. So you can kind of read it how it's moving back and forward, right? It's just the parameters of that connect curve need to be altered. So in this case, if you select your continuity to be position, so by right-clicking it, select position, that'll now make it so that it's like a straight line from each curve.
Yeah.
And then if we set our close or loop value to false, that'll stop it from closing itself up.
Okay.
So now, if we take, we've actually got the two end conditions. Like you can see here, I can delete these now. We've now got finger joints, right?
Yeah.
And really, all we have to do is just make sure that we get this top and bottom curve, and then we've effectively got everything we need to do the laser cutting. Yeah?
Yeah.
So this component here is giving us element 1 and 3, which is the left and right. What indexes do you think I need to get the top and bottom?
So 2 and 4?
Yeah, or 4 could also be, just have a look. 4 could also be what?
0?
Oh, yeah, jokes.
Okay. So now we could do this. We could grab list item and oops. Uh-oh. Please don't crash. Okay. We can grab list item and put in 0 and 2. But the thing is, if someone comes along later and they start fiddling with this thing and they want to put finger joints here instead, for some reason they're drawing this thing 90 degrees, then that's not like, now these are doubling up, right?
Yeah.
So another way of thinking about grabbing top and bottom is we want to remove from this list item 1 and 3 instead of picking out item 0 and 2.
Yeah.
So we can use cull index. We can use the exact same input, and the indexes that go into that will then give us the top and the bottom.
Okay.
So now we just have, we just need to collect all these curves up into singles area, single parameter. So I just hide this all, and this is enough to bake to laser cut. Now this, like, I understand this system isn't perfect. Like you can see here how this goes a little bit longer than what it needs to. That's just something that you guys are maybe have to work out how to do that yourselves.
All right.
In this case, you should be able to take this to the laser cutter and it will work, because it does, that extra cut won't ruin the system. Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's quite, like, remember how I was sort of talking about thinking, how would you instruct a robot to make a cake?
Yeah.
And you have to think, okay, well, you need to know if they're going to sift flour. They need to know which sift they're going to use, and they need to know what type of flour it's going to use, and where is it going to sift the flour into. If you don't tell it to get a bowl to sift it into, it's just going to sift it all over the floor, right?
Yeah.
So when you start working with this system in terms of, okay, you take a line, you divide it up into equal segments, you take a pattern of those segments and you move them inwards. That's a very different way. Like, that's effectively taking that internal thought process that we would go through manually if we were drawing this like by hand with pens or with CAD. There's we just need to bring that subconscious thought process into Grasshopper.
Yeah.
Cool?
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. Is this less overwhelming?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just like there's so many different commands that you can do. Not sure which one to use.
Okay. Yes. So just remember as well that Grasshopper, like, this is going to look. This has got a whole bunch of plugins installed on it, so just ignore everything up to display. So everything beyond display, just ignore it. Grasshopper organizes things into very language-oriented categories, or maths-oriented categories. So parameters, they're going to be all the things that sort of let you play around with numbers and geometry inside Rhino, and that they're also going to have all these kind of like funky inputs. Then like maths, sets, vector, curve, surface, mesh, intersect, transform, and display, they're all very straightforward, right? Like if you're looking for something that adds or divides, where are you going to find it?
Math.
Yes. And if you want to do something, like if you want to offset a surface, where do you think you're probably going to find that?
Surface.
Yeah. So within that is offsetting a surface and analyzing the surface. Freeform, is it a freeform surface? Is it a primitive? Or do you think it's a surface utility?
Utility.
Yep. And look, there it is, offset.
Okay.
Cool.
So it's laid out pretty simple.
Yeah. So the thing, like,
In a way.
it's really like eventually you're going to learn what each of these components do, and you're going to remember that, or at least you're going to learn all the ones that are important to you. So, like for example, I actually know all of these components based on experience.
Yeah.
So I know they're there. But the thing is, there was a time when Grasshopper was in a lot of flux, and we were getting a lot of updates, sometimes like every week, and each update would have new components in it. And it was up to me to be diligent and go and check what those new components did.
Yeah.
But that was while I was at uni, and that was while I was sort of working with this in practice. But right now, Grasshopper hasn't had a major update for a very long time, and so we haven't seen any new components coming out in the stable version. So it's it's worth doing some exploration in terms of the things that you're interested in doing, especially like with your next assignment where you're expected to come up with some 3D geometry. There's like everything you see here helps you create 3D geometry, right? Because it's under surface, yeah? So like I personally don't want to tell you, okay, we're going to just make spheres and we're going to move spheres around and just work with spheres, because that might not be what you want to do. So there's far more learning involved in terms of you going and exploring, okay, well, how do we do a loft? And in this case, you should have a fairly good understanding of what loft is already. Yeah?
Yeah.
So you should know, okay, well, we can create curves in 3D space and loft between them to get a shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Cool?
Yeah.
So in terms of like getting to know every component, it's not something that I expect any of you guys to have by the end of the semester, let alone by the end. Like you got, like in your case, you guys are only doing this as an elective, but I don't even expect the computational design students to know every component by the end of their degree. So that's fine, right?
All right.
Like there's never going to be one of those like, oh, how come you don't know what the substrate component does?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, oh, if you don't know what substrate does, then there's no point talking to you. That's never going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, more so, if I said, hey, we've got this curve, and we want it to run along a line to create a surface. If you've never done that before, you know roughly where to look to solve that yourself, right? Like it's either going to be in curve or surface, right? Like you're generating something 3D, like a 3D surface, so it's going to be in here somewhere, or it's going to be somewhere in curve, and in this case, it's somewhere in surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I'm probably going to have to go over the living hinge, right?
Yes, please.
So just before we start it, can you even like, you can conceive now how you would do a living hinge?
Oh, like just by scoring the material, right? And then
Yeah,
so
but-
that it becomes flexible.
Yeah, but let me grab. We don't want to do any of these like complicated living hinges, even though this is beautiful. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. That has
But if we just use this type of living hinge as an example, if I just have a look at this as a typology, and just imagine that we're going to ignore this left section and this right section. Just think about that. If I were to start this manually with two lines that define the top and the bottom, can you think of how you would go through creating a living hinge?
Would it be a very similar process to the finger joints?
Yes.
Except, yeah, just like offsetting it, but like not doing it like the finger joints, obviously, but a similar process.
Yeah. So do you just want to talk it through now before we actually code it?
So if you did like a line and
Like
then
a vertical line?
Yeah, between the 2 points, and then divided it equally.
Yep. So like if that was the division.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then move every second one, like cut them so they're separate curves, and then grab every second one and move it inwards, and then would it just be a matter of duplicating that?
Yeah, so I'm going to suggest a different way of doing it, because if you do this and then you move it, sorry, if we do this, moving it kind of, if it works, right? In theory, but we're not thinking of this thing as a whole system, right? It'd be far better that after we've done this, the whole thing's done, right? So you don't have to sort of go through and do this. Yeah. So my personal, you're right, that would work. And there's 100 different ways that we can do this. So you are that is a good way of thinking about it. But I would personally prefer to lay the lines out first. Yeah. And then, so if we were to call this line A, B, and C, in this example, this one would be line A, then this line would be line B, and this line would be line C. Yeah. So we're gonna script that now, okay? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So we're gonna use this exact same system. So we really care about this, and I'm gonna copy it. Now, every time you see me copy something, move away from the script and paste, I'm hitting Control-Shift-V, which pastes the thing that I've just copied to the center of my Grasshopper environment. Yeah. Cool? Yep. And in this case, we don't really care about 1 and 3. We actually, if I just hide everything, we actually care about 0 and 2. Cool? Yeah. So there's some, this is heading in the direction of making this complex. So because what we've got is 2 curves per list. I personally don't think it's appropriate to introduce you guys how to do a more complex way of solving this at the moment. So right now, just to avoid that, I need you to get another list item and plug that in. And by default, the index is 0. And that's going to give you the first item in that list. If you zoom in and hit plus, that's going to give you I plus 1, and that'll give you the second item in the list. Yeah. Okay. There are far better ways of doing this, but this is really just a beginner's way of solving that solution. So what that does is it means that we've now got a list of the bottom curves and a list of the top curves. So bottom curves, top curves. And I understand it's counterintuitive that the top parameter is the bottom and the bottom parameter is the top, but it's just how it's gonna work. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So we're going to divide those curves with that exact component that we used before, but we just didn't use it. It was a little example. So divide curve, and if we use that for both, and we actually create a slider and share that slider's value. So let's make this go up to 30, let's say. We share that slider's value between the two, then we can divide them with that same number. Yeah. And that will then let us create a line between oops, okay, yeah, that's exactly what was meant to happen. So that one, let's create a line between the start point of each and the start point of each and each corresponding point.
Yeah.
Why do you know why this particular thing is doing what it's done?
Because of the way that the dots, I don't know how to word it, but like go along the line.
Yeah. So where's the start? Where would you think the start of the bottom line is?
On the left.
And where would you think the start of the top line is?
On the right.
Beautiful. I know I'm probably answering that with my mouse.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, but that's what I thought anyway.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Okay, so that means what we need to do to get that to work is we just need to make sure that the bottom curve is flipped. Sorry, the top curve is flipped so that it's going in the same direction. So if we use flip curve, so you can find flip curve under curve in utilities.
Yeah.
That will make sure that that's going in the same order and we're getting our lines to run vertically. Now, if we were to be laser cutting this system on these three panels, what do you see that's glaringly different?
That the longer one has larger width between the lines.
Yeah. And that is because this particular divide curve component, it works off a number. So it's dividing each of these by, in this case, 30. If I were to change the dimension of one of them, they're going to get tighter or longer. It's always going to produce 30. So what we want to do is we want to set this up so that the divisions aren't based on just the number that we choose, and we want them to be based off a length. So that way, like this will always be 3 mil, and this will be 3 mil.
Yeah.
Cool. So the way we're going to do that is we're just going to get the length of one of these the bottom curve. So we can get the length through curve under analysis with length. So we'll grab that length. That's going to tell us exactly how long it is. And lo and behold, it's 101 and 37. And you can see here our sliders are 101 and 37. So, and what we want to do is we want to take this number that we're using to define the distance. So if I had length and I've got a distance of, let's say, 3 mil, what function would I have to do to the length to get the number of divisions? So if I, like, for example, if I've got a length of 90 mil, and I wanted these to be spaced at 3 mils, how would I get the number? Like, just think outside of Grasshopper. How would you get the number of divisions that there would be?
Well, like,
It would be a maths. Is it a maths problem?
well, yeah, because wouldn't it be? But it's not 90 divided by 3.
Why not?
Oh yeah, because then that's 30. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I prefer not to use these operators. Instead, I'm going to write an expression, and we're just going to go x divided by y, which is going to give us 90 divided by 3, and that'll give us the number. Now, in this case, I'm not too fussed if it gives us a floating number instead of an integer. These components here, they don't take floating numbers, and what they do is they then turn them into integers. So we're just going to use that. What that means is it's going to generate whatever number it needs to be as close to 3 as possible. So it might be 3.2 or it might be 2.9, but it'll try and get it to be as close to 3 mils.
Yeah.
Cool. So we'll plug that in. And now when we pull that up and down, you see how they're similar now?
Yeah.
Instead of being grossly different.
Yeah.
So we'll just use that as 3. Now the last thing is when we cut this thing, the start line and the end line is actually going to be on the edge. It's going to be the same line that we used to cut the rectangle. So, and we don't want that to double up, right? So we want to remove on each list the start line and the end line. In this case, it's 30, but on our other curves, it's 0 and 12, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to use, like we used this component before, cull index. So what that was doing is it's going to cull, like if I cull the 0 value, it's culling the start point. So you can see there that's gone red.
Yeah.
But how do we need this to also cull 30, and we can't type 30 in because if we do, then it's going to, in this case, there is no 30, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to consider this thing as like, if I had a negative number, any negative number just rolls back to the end. If I want to get rid of the end line, what's the other number that we want to put in?
Would be -1.
Yep. So -1, that will remove the start and the end.
Okay, yeah.
So now what that's doing is it's set up a nice list of lines that we can use to start making that living hinge.
Yeah.
So if we look back to this image, oops. And now imagine we've got lines running down through each of these. What's the next step that we need to take? We're only gonna we should be working on each sort of like separately, right?
Yeah.
So we basically want to take there seems to be a pattern here, right?
Yeah.
So looking at this, I want maybe every second one to have the off pattern and every even one to have the on pattern, that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you use to do that, to start that off?
So you need, would you need to define which ones are odd and even first?
Well, we just need to put the odd and evens into 2 separate lists, right?
Yeah.
What would we use to do that?
So the Boolean function?
Yeah. So that the Boolean function is dispatch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to work like that patterning where we're just alternating between A, B, A, B, A, B.
Yeah.
Is exactly the same as the finger joint, where we're alternating between A, B, A, B, A, B. Cool? So,
Yeah.
so we use the same default pattern of true false. And we dispatch this list. We should be getting a set of curves that describe A and a set of curves that describe B, which are so red and green. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. So we're gonna work on a system that just works on A at the moment, and then we'll just copy and paste that for B, and then we'll be finished. practically finished. So now that we've separated A out, then what do we do? Just logically, you even use this the step before. So like as in you explained it as we were drawing the system. So now that we're at this point, what do we need to do?
Do we just,
Pardon?
sorry.
You'd have to like determine out of all the green ones, so A,
Yeah.
where you want them to be cut, sort of thing.
Yep. So if we were to use this green line, the straight line in our system, it would just end up cutting the whole rectangle into different pieces, and it would just fall apart, right?
Yeah.
So we need this to have like a dash pattern. What did we use before to make a dash pattern?
Offset?
No. It's very windy. So remember, if we're going to take a line and we want it to break it into bits, what did we use to break it into bits?
Oh, shutter?
Yep. And what other component did we need to do that?
The range?
Yep. So I'm just going to cheat, and I'm going to copy that from that previous script. And then we're going to paste that down here with our set of A curves, and we're going to split them up. Then, so we've got these all split up, right? Which ones do we only care about? Like, we don't actually probably care about any of the second, like, I'll draw a line through them. We probably don't care about these, and we don't care about these, and we don't care about these. Yeah?
Yeah.
So how would we get rid of them? How could we get rid of them? Just consider all the components that you've used. Is there a component that could just give you the even ones in that list?
Would you dispatch it again?
Yeah, that's exactly what you could do. So we could dispatch this again. And we could just get the A values out of those. So if I hide everything else, we're just getting the A values. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, we've done the work in terms of the logic already once. We could do that same work again. So all we have to do is copy shatter, dispatch, and geometry. Do the same thing to our B curves. So here, the B curves. But instead of getting the A, we could get the B.
Yeah.
And now we've got an alternating pattern. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that.
Beautiful. Okay, so we've now got a system. We can change the number of divisions along the line. We can change the number of divisions along the rectangle based on a dimension. And we can change the dimensions of the rectangles. And we should get a fairly uniform living hinge cut pattern that goes onto that. Plus, the system logically doesn't cut to the end. So it's always cutting in from the edge. Cool?
Yeah.
So there's just one more thing that we need to do. What do you notice about our lines here that are different to the lines that people have used as examples? So I'll just... We're almost done, by the way.
Like that particular one.
Yeah. It's actually quite important that this does this, or otherwise the system doesn't work so well.
There's kind of like overlaps.
Yep, that's exactly right. So our system, these line up, whilst in this system there's an overlap. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even though they've only done like a 3 division based system, that we can see that their logic has that overlap, which makes makes it weaker, so that it can bend. So what we need to do is we need to get these to overlap. Now I'm not going to do anything to it what we've already done. We're just going to do stuff to these curves to make them overlap. And quite intuitively, we're working with curves, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think that we need to do to these curves to get them to overlap?
Make them a bit longer.
Yep. Is there another word that you would use in a CAD environment to do that?
Extend?
Yes. So where would you find extend? So what are we extending? We're extending.
Is it in utilities?
Yep. So it's going to be under curve. It's probably.
Utilities.
Let's have a look under utilities. Do you see anything that says extend?
Extend curve.
Awesome. Teach a man to fish. He'll eat forever. Eventually, you guys won't need me, right? Cool. So we need to extend. Now, the thing with extend is that it doesn't work unless it has L0 and L1 with a value. So if you're only extending, if you're only extending one dimension, it doesn't work. It has to extend both. And in the case of if you don't want one of those dimensions to extend, you just have to set that to 0.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're going to use the same number on both the start and the end of the extension. And that's going to let us extend our lines so that they overlap.
All right.
Cool?
Yeah. So does it matter that there are lines hanging outside the rectangle?
Well, it does and it doesn't, right? Like if we were laser cutting this, those little extra lines, they would maybe add an extra like 2 seconds to the final cut. But if you were stacking these very close to each other, you might end up with these lines overhanging into your other shape, and you don't want that.
Yeah.
Right? Plus, in the near future, you might be working on a project that has, you might have to like laser cut 1,000 of these. And so instead of it being an extra 2 seconds to the laser cut, it might be an extra hour. And that might cost money. And so you want to reduce the amount of time it takes to cut. So we actually went through this in class. Do you want me to show you how to remove those little extensions now?
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay, so we've got all of our curves in these buckets or branches. I'll use the right terminology, branches. I'm going to just simplify that so that we can see we've got one, well, we've got a lot of branches. Okay. So we've got a whole bunch of branches. You can see, just as I go down this, you can see the first number is 0 with all of these. And that goes all the way up to 55. and then it goes to 1, and then it goes to 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are, if you go back to that system that we were thinking about before with the first 0 is the first rectangle, it's likely that each one of these is that rectangle. So 0 is the first rectangle, 1 on the left is the second, and 2 on the left is the third. What we need is we need to get all of these curves in each of these lists to be sort of like in their own branch that relates to the rectangle. And it's something that I'm not going to explain right now. It's something that you guys will learn in the future. But to get that to work right now, we need to right-click and simplify. And we need to use this component here called trim tree. And what that will do is that'll put each of those into just 3 branches.
Yep.
Cool?
Yeah.
So I don't expect you to understand this, and I'm not going to explain it. So don't worry about that. But just to make this work, you can trim tree. Then we're going to use this component here called trim with region. A lot of trim words at the moment. So what that does is it takes a list of curves, a region, and a plane, and it splits those curves up into curves that are inside and curves that are outside. So in this case, we're going to take the curves that we want to trim. We're going to grab our rectangles. So that's these guys here. So I'm going to just plug that into a curve parameter, cut it, move over to where I want to place it, and paste in place. Before I put that in, I just need to put that through the graphed tree component. Yet again, something that will be explained later. That goes into our region. And I've noticed, just very much like what we did with the offset here, where we had to put that XY plane into P, just put the X, you need to put another XY plane into the P value here.
Yeah.
And that will then give you, we don't want the outside curves, we want the inside curves. So if we hide all of this, that'll give us those to cut. Delete this now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. And we're done. Like, you guys should already know how to bake. So
Yeah.
you should be able to bake that and get it laser cut.
All right. Thank you.
The trick is now combining, like if you want to start combining is combining this with the finger joints. But that's really up to you if you want to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Especially you do not want to do this where the living hinge actually starts impeding on the finger joint.
Yeah.
So that's really good, up to you guys. But this is everything that we covered in class.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for that.
It's less overwhelming now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop the broadcast and we can chat a little bit more.